today with Kim Murray talking about woman being the word of the year. Has anybody in this room Googled the word boss lady? Come on, you can admit it. It's okay. There are quite a few definitions floating around online, but here are two that really stick out. A woman who goes fiercely after what she wants, who knows building a business is just as important as building a life, and cheers for other boss ladies along the way. The second is the woman in charge. I'm honored to introduce 4 outstanding boss ladies to the stage today. Just like those definitions, these women are fierce, compassionate, and powerful, and they are shaping Michigan's future. Welcome with me Tahara Saad, the head of DEI at Ford Nest. Tahara is a TEDx speaker and serves as the vice president of the Arab American Women's Business Council and a full-time infotainment engineer with a BS in electrical engineering and an MS in engineering management. She is also an honoree of the 2023 class of Women Who Shape the State. Kelly Preston is the owner and president of Capital Steel and Wire, an innovative manufacturer, distributor, and supplier of steel bar and wire products. In 2001, Kelly established Capital Steel and Wire with her late husband, serving as chief financial officer for several years before taking the helm as company president in 2015. Under her leadership, the company has experienced significant business and financial growth. Capital Steel and Wire received national certification for the past 3 years as a woman-owned business by the WBENC and WOSB, and is a member of the Association of Women in the Metal Industries. Dr. Teresa Woodruff is the interim president at Michigan State University. Teresa was selected by the Michigan State University Board of Trustees as MSU's interim president effective November 4, 2022. She previously served as provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at MSU. As chief academic advisor, Teresa provided leadership for matters related to academic programs, research, and outreach involving faculty, students, and academic staff. I also want to welcome back to the stage Kelly Frick, the Senior Director of News at MLive Media Group, to moderate this conversation. Welcome, boss ladies.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the main stage for our last session today. And welcome boss ladies. Thank you friends for joining today. I think this is going to be a really good discussion. We've got some really interesting women and some good perspectives. So I'm going to start with a really softball question, which is, when did you know that you wanted to be in leadership in your business? I'll start with you, Teresa.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kelly. I'm so honored to be with each of you. Such impressive people. It's really fun to be here with all of you in the room as well. When did I first want to be in leadership in my business? I guess in academics. In kindergarten, there were kids that weren't quite getting their lessons right, and so I started my own little club at one side of the room to teach some of the kids how to read. Because I thought, well, you know, they just needed a little extra help, and we were going to get it along, going to move it along. And then it turned out that, you know, kindergarten turned out to be only half a day, and I was like, well, I can stay. I absolutely stay this afternoon and do this again. So I guess the instinct started young, but in higher education, it started when I was first a faculty member then at Northwestern, where I was for 35 years before coming to MSU. And really just putting myself into positions where I could help those folks who needed kind of that next step of organization. And I've always had a leadership role aligned with my faculty, but that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of my leadership interests.
My answer is a bit different. I did not want to go into leadership at first. I had a completely different life plan, and I figured I wanted to just get my degree, work for a little bit, become a stay-at-home mom, let my kids grow up, and then come back in the field and then figure it out from there. And, like all plans, nothing ever works out. And this one definitely worked out for the better. And the more and more that I was working and the more and more I got involved, the more I realized that there was something missing in leadership. There were things that I wanted that I couldn't find. I couldn't find the right mentors. I had amazing mentors, by the way, within engineering, but they were all men, and they could never, I was always hitting barriers and not understanding why. Why wasn't I as successful? Why wasn't I moving forward as often or as quickly? And I realized it's because they were all men. So my barriers were not the same as their barriers. And then I actively searched out women mentors, and I found some good ones, but in the leadership, I couldn't really find, nothing really felt like it was a good fit for me. So then I went out and I basically, there's this one piece of advice that I got from a senior VP, a male actually, and we were talking about opportunities and leadership and making sure that when you get the opportunities, you take them. And for me, I said, well, I'm actively looking for opportunities and I can't find any. What then? And he looked at me and he mentioned something to me that it changed the trajectory for me. And he basically said, you create your own. And for me, that was like an aha moment. And it made me realize, well, if I can't find the mentor or the leader that I'm looking, then I'm going to become that and create that for other women so that they have the same plans and I can help them figure out what they need to do. So for me, it kind of leadership found me.
Kelly, how about you?
We'll just do this. We're good. We're flexible. Okay. My story is a little bit different as well. So I graduated from Michigan State with an elementary education degree and was teaching.
Go green.
Yes. And had a few children and decided I thought I wanted to stay home and be home with my children. And my husband came home one day and said, let's start a steel company. And I thought, what a strange conversation this is. Okay. So it kind of found me as well. We started our steel company from the kitchen table with $6,000, the two of us. And how I knew I wanted to be a leader and be in a leadership role was it just started to become fun. And start building something from the ground up. At the time, I was not passionate about steel. I didn't know anything about steel, but I was passionate about building something and having something that I could be proud of, do with my family. And so in the same respect, leadership found me, and it's fun.
That's great, thanks. Each of you have had such an amazing career so far, but at some point, did you have to define your own success? And how did you actually decide what success would look like for you? And Tahara, I'm going to start with you this time.
Thank you, Kelly. For me, it was realizing, first of all, that success was not a one-size-fits-all. Because again, I was going off the same, career advice. You get into a position, you work your way up the ladder, and that's what happens, right? You're stuck in one role. And when I started down this path of creating new opportunities, I looked into the Arab American Women's Business Council, which is a nonprofit for women. And once I got involved with that and really started doing more women empowerment, women leadership, women development, it really helped open my eyes that once I was able to redefine what success meant for me, it was a whole new world. It opened up so many different opportunities that now the opportunities started to follow through to me. And it's so important to realize that success should never be about what you have. It should never be what it looks like. Success for me is about defining what it feels like. If you're comfortable, are you at peace, are you content? And one of the most important things is not to chase happiness when making a success, because if we think about it, what made us happy 5 years ago is probably not the same thing that makes us happy today. And So if you're chasing that happiness, you're gonna constantly be chasing a moving target. So success is when you feel most at peace and most comfort and like at home and just completely fulfilled. And figuring that out is the journey. It's definitely not easy, but it's as long as you keep following what feels right, success will always follow.
Kelly, how about you?
I'm dealing with the operator error. Okay, so mine's very easy. Success for me is two things. One is I still want to go to work when I get up in the morning, not every day, maybe. I tell everyone that I work with maybe 95% of the time. Anyone that tells you they want to go to work 100% of the time is lying to you. But you know, most days I want to get up and go to work still. That's success for me. And then also, if the people that I work with still want to come to work every day and see me and want to be involved in the company, that's success as well. Not work for me, but work with me. That's big for me. Work together.
Let me ask you a follow-up. Is that part of your boss lady philosophy, is that people work with you?
Absolutely. I've got people here that work with me, and they know I don't like to introduce people that, you know, this person works for me, they work with me, because it's the truth. I think if you are successful and you are a successful leader, you surround yourself with very talented, successful people. And it would be wrong for me to take the credit for the success of our company without acknowledging the people that I work with and that don't work for me but work with me.
I love that. Teresa, how about you? How do you define success?
You know, success has been defined, I've defined it in different ways in different parts of my career, and I guess one of the models that I like of that Marie Curie had, which is the way of progress is neither swift nor easy. And it is that first part of swiftness. Sometimes you want to be defining success in a very temporal way, a very quick way. What is success today? What is success this week? And in fact, I think for a lot of what we do, success takes time. And you know, you might not see the outcomes of what you are leading, or it has to germinate and it has to grow, and it takes periods of time. So defining success really is at some level about process as much as product, and that along the way that we're saying, well, what do we have to do now and be consequential in now in order for the organization to succeed at the end of the year, or at the end of 5 years, or in 10 years from now? Because those consequential decisions are then part of the organization's ability to succeed. So that way of thinking about every day is my favorite day, and that progress is in the process, and that the eventuality, if you get that process right, is that the organization can succeed. I think that's a really big part of what success means to me right now.
Being a leader in a company, as many of you know, is not without adversity. And so, Teresa, I'm going to start with you because you've had a heck of a year at Michigan State University. How do you handle going through some really difficult times? And was this perhaps one of the most difficult times in your career?
It was, without a doubt, the most difficult time. I think starting with the way I came into this position was somewhat head spinning. I think many people have seen that there was an abrupt change in the presidency, and I abruptly became president. You know, that was something that, as an institution, not ready for change, it became something that was quite hard on the organization. So the way in which I led during that time was the way I was leading up to that time, to try and maintain. And it turned out that I coined a word during that first week, which was stagility. I was trying to say we need stability, but to be agile. And I wanted people to know that there was someone who actually knew the business, and that we weren't going to be potted plants. So I guess I'm glad I didn't conjugate potted plants into that. But so I said to our student organization that, you know, I was going to lead with stagility, and the newspaper picked that up, and that's really kind of been what we've tried to do, that we are a stable organization, and we can continue to rise. So from that, then, of course, to the terrible events of February 13th, which this whole community really uplifted MSU during that time, and it really was one of the most difficult times to lead. And you know, I lead much of what was said earlier about bringing people together. I try to lead with both discernment and with wisdom. And wisdom really is to bring as many people together to try and make the choices that are necessary in the moment for the organization. So in that immediacy of that evening, the next day, and the next week, and still to the day, we're still making, and we had to make hard calls when to come back to campus and how to come back to campus. Those are still those decisions that at some point I'm going to process. I haven't quite yet. But you just can't imagine, and all of us have had to as a community, that kind of loss and still be able to move forward. We just finished 2 weeks of graduation, and we wanted to celebrate those who are graduating and the experiences that they have had while respecting what had happened. So we tried to walk that line as well. So in each of these kind of major cases, the abrupt change that led to leadership as president, and then in the immediacy and then the ongoing nature of the February 13th event, trying to bring discernment, which means not just what someone says, but what is all the data around, how do I bring in and be able to discern what is true and what is truth, what is falsehood, and then bring that wisdom. And to the students, as they were continuing on their journey, one of my addresses to them had to do with grace and empathy, with the expectation of excellence. And it was not the first time we were saying grace and empathy, accommodation, and excellence. And I think from, to be an effective leader, it can happen overnight, but I think the most effectiveness is that you're living out those leadership models and values so that they can be deployed when most urgently needed. And it's been a heck of a year for MSU, but I'm so proud of the community. The way all of you came together to support MSU, to support your neighbors, to support the students, to support the organization. That happened to all of us, and I'm very mindful of the fact that MSU is not just a place for education, it is the largest employer in Michigan. And our alumni are all across 83 counties across the state. So this really was something that impacted every single one of us. And having that mindfulness and then trying to help all of us move ahead has been some of the things that we've done for this last however months.
Well, as an alum and as a parent of an MSU student, I want to thank you personally for your leadership during a very difficult time. So thank you. Tamara, I bet you have had some stories of adversity in your career as well.
I have. For me, I've had adversity both within the career and then also through personal life. We all have personal tragedies and trauma that happen to us. So I've had to navigate both. And it's going to be one of those things, do as I say, not as I do. Because I probably have not always dealt with it in a very healthy way. I compartmentalize a lot. And when I compartmentalize, it's kind of like what you were saying, I deal with the most urgent, important things and say, okay, we'll process this at a later time. But the key is you actually have to process it, not like me, and just kind of keep burying it. It'll eventually come up. But it's so important that when you're navigating through adversity, it's important to kind of, yes, compartmentalize, but also prioritize. And you prioritize what's the most urgent and what needs your attention the most. So for me, it's where my engineering background kind of comes into play, where I think, okay, what's the process that we have to go through? What's the first thing and the second thing? And kind of thinking through what the reactions of those would be. So it's one of the hardest things to not only do leadership, but just to work and to push through adversity. You still have deadlines, you still have family you have to take care of, there's still things that you have to do and things that rely on you. So the most important part is not forgetting to take care of yourself, because your mental health, if you are not in the right mental space, you can't lead anyone else. So it's about taking care of you first, right? You gotta put your own mask on first. And then just struggling through it and being very self-aware, I think is important too, because sometimes it's good to check in with yourself and say, am I getting the right inputs? Am I seeing things for what they are? Am I being as unjudgmental and unbiased as I can to take in all of the inputs and facts and to deal with them factually? And then to touch in emotionally and say, okay, where does this stand and how can I make the biggest impact on that? So it's tough leading through adversity and all of these different tragedies, but it makes you stronger in realizing that you have to do what's important for everyone else too.
Kelly, how about you? What has been some of the traumatic things that have happened that you've had to lead through?
Okay, you ready? All right.
We're ready.
Okay, so those of you that don't know my story is my husband and I started the company in 2001 from our kitchen table, and had a fairly successful company. We were growing, and in 2015, so 8 years ago, my husband passed away unexpectedly. We had 3 small children at the time. I was CFO, he was president of the company. At the time, I believe we had around probably 40 to 45 employees. And so we talk about leading through adversity. The hardest part of that for me as a leader in the company was first deciding if I wanted to keep the company or if I wanted to sell it. That was actually an easy decision for me because I was so invested, loved the people that I worked with, very passionate about it. I said I didn't like steel to begin with. I was very passionate about it in 2015. But the hardest part about leading through adversity for me was walking into a room of 40 people and telling them that the person that they knew was the face of the company, my husband at the time, had died. And to help them understand that we weren't going anywhere, that I was going to leave the company, that they didn't need to start looking for other jobs, that we were going to be okay, we were going to make it through. But the hardest part about that was believing that myself and preparing myself for that conversation, not as a grieving widow, but as a leader of a company. And that's a hard thing to do, is to look people in the eye, have that hard conversation and say, we're going to be okay, and believe it. And believe it. That's hard, really hard. And I think now, as I've moved through my career and I'm not afraid of those hard conversations, because I've had to have probably the hardest one. I'm sure telling my kids was probably the hardest, but telling my coworkers was probably the second hardest conversation I've ever had to have, because I had to believe in myself.
So I love that. And it's great for a follow-up question. I'm going to stay with you and ask, all 3 of you have talked about like processing through, you're a leader, you have some traumatic event, so you have adversity. How do you get back to taking care of yourself? Which is something women in general, we tend to be not great at taking care of ourselves. How did you, or have you learned how to take care of yourself?
Do I have to answer that correctly?
You can answer it however you'd like.
Well, I'd say, some of that is survival. And I'll just speak for me in my case, those first few weeks, days, hours, months, years, it was survival. And it was taking care of the business, the health of the company, the health of my coworkers, the health of my family, my children. And as we all probably do in this room, I came last. And it took me a while to get there and realize that I could be a better leader, a better mother, a better daughter, a better sister, if I took care of myself first. Still very hard for me to do today. I actually have to block out time on my calendar to go for a walk or to take a break. I can see some people laughing right now because I will literally walk out of the office and say I'm going for a walk. But it's also me modeling that behavior for the people that I work with as well. But it's not an easy task. And I'm getting there. How about that? I'm getting there.
I like that. Teresa, how do you stay grounded and take care of yourself?
My favorite thing, I get recharged by being around students. So I go and have lunch and brody, as odd as that sounds, but that's my favorite thing to do. And get recharged by seeing those students, in whose interests I serve, but they also serve as a great reservoir for me to recharge. I also like to garden, so that's my other great passion. The garden always needs something, so it's very demanding, so that draws my attention. Particularly in January when I look at all the seed catalogs. a lot of cortical time.
Tahara, how about you? How do you take care of yourself?
I'd say it's also a work in progress. I do a lot of, I like to read, right? So I like to, at the end of the night, I get energized at groups like this, but I recharge my energy by being on my own. I'm a bit introverted like that. So at the end of the night, I put my kids, my husband to sleep. Everyone's knocked out. He'll be like, he's like, babe, are you sure you're good if I sleep early? No, it's okay, I'll be fine. So I will then just kind of sit on my own and I'll just watch some shows, I'll watch Netflix or I'll read, and that's when I start to process and plan for the next day and what comes up, and just that peace and quiet for me is really what I need. But it's also really dealing with, for me, what I'm learning to do is to actually deal and sit with the emotions and to process what's going on. And it takes years for me. It takes years for me to actually, that's how long I can push it down. It manifests in other ways. I'm like, okay, I should probably deal with this. So it takes time, and it's definitely still a work in progress. But I'm getting there.
As a lot of speakers and other women that I talked to today, it's about grace, grace for others, grace for ourselves. So that's okay, that it can take as long as it needs to tomorrow. Teresa, I'm going to start with you on the next question. Have you ever been so discouraged that you wanted to quit your job? And if so, what did you do?
Well, the answer generally is no. I really like my job, or whichever jobs I've been. But yeah, there are moments of real discouragement. And because you can see what should be, but you just can't get other people to get there with you. And so trying to come, by another route to get to that goal, sometimes you can just think, well, it's just Sisyphean. It's just not, I'm going to keep pushing that rock up. So making sure that one wards against it, I try to tell myself there's a lot of incentivism. I think that's, circumstances around that seem to, there can be a configuration that just seems beyond what you can actually do. Finding ways to continue to have the confidence to just continue to lead. Because if you fall into cynicism, then, there's a lot of collateral losses. And so just finding that courage to keep finding that next way. And if there are those who seem to be making choices or decisions that tend to push you back, just try to work in ways that create the arguments for success. And sometimes it's the things you do, sometimes it's the patience you have to show, sometimes it's just that mental resilience to keep coming in every day. I have a little yellow sticky on my computer that says, "This is my favorite day." And sometimes I looked at that yellow sticky and said, "Really? Really? I don't know. I really don't know." But then something good happens out of that day. And I know for many people, I have a joy jar that I keep every week, and I demand of myself something good for the week. And sometimes it's like looking at that piece of paper saying, "I'm not so sure this is a week I want to put anything in there." And then if you can find and see joy in something, and then at the end of the year you look back and there's all that joy, and you can remember that was a day I couldn't imagine getting through. And here we are looking back at all those joys. So creating that, creating those tools by which when those inevitable moments arrive that feels too hard to say this is my favorite day, but then to be able to see that lived out in your own life, at least for me, that's been very helpful to work against that cynicism that can come in from circumstances beyond one's control, even though you can see what you need to get to. And eventually, if you just keep working, you can get to probably a slightly different place, but to progress.
That fighting against the cynicism is a great one. Tahara, how about you? Have you ever been discouraged and felt like quitting?
There was one time that comes to mind where I actually had my dad and my husband talking me down from the ledge. I was like, that's it, I'm quitting. And they're both like, what do you mean? It was in the height of the pandemic. And before that, talking about personal and all these different adversities. I know in 2019, I had my daughter. And then 10 days later, my mom passed away. And then while I was on maternity leave, I had kind of like come back into work. I was put into a position at work, and the actual work was something that I didn't enjoy doing. I actually didn't like it. And I was in a specific type of engineering, and it was a different type of engineering. So it was work that I was unfamiliar with, a brand new group. I wasn't enjoying it, I didn't understand it. And they wanted me to be the expert in it and to write like specifications for it. So it was just a lot stacked against me. And then the pandemic hit. And so when I started working from home, I had a 4-year-old and I had an 8-month-old. And I had no help because my husband was the manager of an emergency department. So I was completely alone, no childcare, in a very demanding job. And it was extremely difficult. And on top of all of that, I had all of the demands of a boss that didn't understand any of that. And they were still pushing me and telling me, you need to take more meetings. I was like, actually, I need less meetings to do my work because I'm working around the clock, because it was no 8 to 5. There was no 8 to 5 whatsoever. So for me, it was constantly working all day long and on weekends, on and off of my laptop. And then my poor husband would come home exhausted, and I would hand off the kids and be like, I need an hour. I need an hour to get my work done. So it was extremely, extremely difficult. It was stressful. I was very anxious. I was very tired. And then my boss was pressuring me even more. And I was the only woman on that team. I was the only one besides my supervisor that was married and had kids. They were all young, single men who were golfing between their meetings. And my boss was telling me I needed to take more meetings. He's like, they have more meetings than you do. And then I looked and I said, actually, they don't, but that's fine. And it got to the point where the pressure was so bad. I was still processing everything that happened from my C-section to my mom to the pandemic to this. It was all too much and I couldn't do it. And I was so extremely discouraged, and I said, if I continue on like this, I will not survive. Something is going to give somewhere, so I have to do something different. Something needs to change. So after my dad and husband were like, you cannot leave, this time was like 15 years, like you cannot leave a 15-year career. This is temporary, you need to be patient. I still disagreed. It was about to be like, watch me. How I handled this was, actually it was something that came out of left field. This is when I did my career change. I got an opportunity in a position completely out of engineering, and it was in my passion, and went into learning and development. I was the employee development program manager, and it was a struggle. I actually had to fight to push against this and to get out of where I was. But that change kind of helped change me, and it helped reset me and make me feel a lot better. And for me, what helped me when I got discouraged, even when I did want to quit, was to lean on the people that were convincing me and supporting me, and just being patient with myself, giving myself grace and saying, okay, a very good friend of mine who's actually here always tells me it's just a phase. This is just a phase, be patient. And that's kind of what I did till I ended up seeing the light.
I need your friend's phone number. Kelly, how about you?
Sure. Well, it's a little bit different for me as a business owner. Quitting my job cannot come to mind, because if I quit my job, I have too many people that work with me that will lose their job. So I definitely have days where I felt very discouraged, but I've never felt that I want to quit, because I know that there's a lot of people that I work with that are relying on me in our company. But a really good example of feeling discouraged was probably a week, maybe even less, after my husband passed. One of our big processor suppliers came in and wanted to meet with me and sat down in our conference room and proceeded to tell me that he would no longer do business with our company because my husband had died and I was running the company now. I had been in the company, I knew what I was doing, but again, that goes back to me having confidence and being able to stand up to that person and saying, that's okay, that's your choice. I'm not gonna force you to do business with our company, but we're gonna be okay without you. We're going to still be successful, we're still gonna grow, and we're gonna be okay. The other part of that for me was now 8 years later and through that process is not allowing there to be a huge chip on my shoulder. I think as women, sometimes we get a chip on our shoulder and we use that as motivation, which is great, but I didn't want to use that chip to bring me down and not help us move forward and grow. There were other suppliers that we could find. We could pivot, we could be flexible, we could do things that we needed to do to still succeed. And but not letting that chip overwhelm me and become too much was also an important part of dealing with that adversity and just now I have to deal with that situation.
I love that all of you, as very important boss ladies, have had real life experiences that I think everybody in this room can relate to. So thank you. I'm going to ask one last question and we'll turn it over to the audience. Tara, I'll start with you. What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self? I know you're only a few years past that, but if you go back just a little bit in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
That is interesting because I think about when I was 25, and it's very personal to me. At 25, I would never have imagined that I would be here. Because for me at 25, I was divorced. I got married very young. I went from being very dependent to having no choice but to be independent. To the point where I was very reliant on other people. My husband at the time, or my dad, or my parents before, was completely on my own, and now I was taking care of my mom at the time. Bought my own house, bought my own cars, and at 25, I was still trying to figure out who I was. And I had the career, I had the friends, I had a divorce, but I still had family. You know, my mom relied on me at that time. So at 25, I would have told myself that you're still on the journey. Because that was when my life changed from what I wanted to, when I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I had a whole idea of what success would be like for me. And now having 25 divorced to not even being a mom and not knowing what was held in the future for me, I had to completely readjust my whole entire way of thinking and my whole entire life plan. And it made me realize that you have to be flexible. You have to be patient. I love my plans. My friends know, like, I have to be very planned and very process-oriented, but be flexible in that one. And when things come up, know that, can you see the good in it? A mistake is only a mistake if there's no lessons learned in it. So for me, it was about always taking those lessons learned, never regretting any decision I ever made. Because I know that I made the best decision that I could with the information that I had at the time, and I thought it through. So for me, it's not about living in regret or thinking about, what am I going to do now my entire life? My plan has changed, now what? So it was taking the time to really be self-aware, learn about myself, learn about what I wanted to do, what was important to me, and kind of pushing through. So at 25, to be sitting here, this was never part of the plan. But you did all right. And that's what it is knowing that sometimes what happens is better than the plan that you had.
Kelly, what would you tell your 25-year-old self?
I would tell myself at 25 to buckle up, Buttercup. It is going to be a bumpy ride. However, to enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey. For those of you that can remember, like printing out MapQuest directions, you know, getting from point A to point B. It might not go the way that you think it's going to go. You may be going down the road and you've got to take a quick left turn or right turn or hit a detour, but enjoy the bumps, the valleys, the straightaways, because it all has value. And you learn from it all. And there's not a lot of people I know that are doing, like later in their career, doing exactly what they were doing when they started their career. And you learn from every experience, every person, you know, every left turn, every right turn, and just enjoy the ride, take in the scenery, take time to enjoy it all, because it goes fast.
Teresa, how about you?
You know, I think for me, it would be every time you find a mentor, reach back and find someone who's a mentor. And so creating that network and that linkage, I think probably I was always looking for mentors. And I think making sure that that's something I talk with a lot of my mentees about. Always, as soon as you find a mentor, you're ready to mentor someone. You'll always find that network. And if we lock arms and link arms, we're going to get further faster together because we're all each other's anchors. So I'd love to tell myself that then and hopefully live that out now, but to continue to build that network of competency and closeness. When you link arms, you're much closer. And not only are you stronger, but you're more emotionally connected with those around you. And I think that mentor-mentee kind of process could really be powerful and change the world.
So I've heard people refer to that whole mentorship, the mentor and the mentee, and then the mentee becomes a mentor. It's almost like a family tree, right, where that legacy lives on. So today has been a day about networking and mentoring and asking questions of one another. So does anybody have questions for the people on our panel?
We actually only have time for one question.
Well, you can ask one question. One special person gets a
Who
question.
wants to be the one?
Yeah, who has the golden ticket to ask a
Well,
question?
now I'm intimidated.
Yeah, Tara, I'm really interested in how you made the switch from a super male-dominated field to DEI.
That's a good one. That's a good question. Okay, so when I was in engineering, I was in a very male-dominated field, and I mentioned all my mentors were male. And it was very hard to find women that, also, there were women, but their career paths and their life paths didn't mesh, right? So I went on this whole journey of self-discovery and trying to figure out what I wanted. And then from that, I realized there's a big gap. There's a lot of women whose ambitions look different, who wanted different things in life. They were still ambitious, but it didn't look like the stereotypical success. So from that journey, I started working with other women that were in the same way. I got involved with the nonprofit, the Arab American Women's Business Council. I started doing workshops, work-life balance and integration and imposter syndrome. And so I started doing things on the side in addition to my career, and I built up those skills. So as part of creating my own opportunities, I wasn't getting that experience in engineering, so I started looking outside. I built up that experience that way. And I just really enjoyed it. I love doing that, and I love working with women, and I love helping anyone in different paths to kind of figure out what works best for them. So from there, I built up that different skill set. And it's hard to get into leadership if you don't have leadership experience. So I wasn't getting it in my career. I was getting projects here and there, but the nonprofit really, I worked my way up within there. So I was on the board, I became a vice president. I did vice president for 2 years, and then I was a president for 3 years. And that leadership and that organization is a whole different type. It's a whole new skill set. From there, I got the opportunity to go into employee development. But what was key is, because for me it was an internal move, I went into learning and development first. I've always been involved with DEI too, I should mention, within the company. vary with our employee resource groups. We worked a lot within that, a couple different events, very involved. When you move careers, it's always important to talk to them. So I set up a meeting with the hiring manager because I said, listen, if I apply for this internally, you're not gonna see anything that qualifies me for this position. So can we set up a quick 30-minute touch point? And she did. And when I went through and I explained to her my experience and my passions and what I love to do, she basically, I hadn't even applied yet, she said, I look forward to interviewing you. So that led me for 2 years into that. And then kind of the similar thing with this, a friend of mine who knew I was very involved. At this point, right, I built my personal brand. People know what I talk about, they know what I'm passionate about, they know what my ambitions are. So this opportunity where I'm at with DEI, a friend of mine who's also working internally sent it to me. And he's like, this is all you. And it was a promotion, and it was a bigger responsibility, and my imposter syndrome kicked in. I was like, oh, that's great. I was flattered, but no. And I actually went and talked to a couple of different people who encouraged me. And they're like, you know you can do this. Same thing. I first got rejected because again, my internal resume did not say this. Because Ford Next right now is a platform where it's a venture studio. So it's new businesses and nonprofit experience and DEI, and she needed multidisciplinary. So once I met with them and I said, okay, well, here's all the stuff I've done outside of Ford as well. And that conversation, same thing. They're like, we think you'd be a good fit. So it's about you finding the opportunities to create that experience for yourself, figure out where you want to be, what skills are missing that you can't currently get, and how can I get those skills? How can I create those experiences to build up that skill set?
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing your personal stories as well. I think that's really meaningful for everybody in this room, so thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.